welcome to another episode of Our Point of View Talk Show. Today, we are going to be talking about sickle cell disease, sickle cell anemia, sickle cell trait. And before we start, just say hello to our hosts and our guests. First, I want to say hello to Ms. Cinta Mickle. How are you, Cinta?
I am doing outstanding as always. Thank you, Ms. Jacqueline. Hello, everybody.
Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate it.
Of course.
And of course, we have our doctor back with us, Dr. Centrell Crawford. Thank you so much for being with us. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you guys?
Good, good. Now, can you give our viewers just a little bit of information, a little bit about your background, please?
I'm Dr. Centrell Crawford. I'm a psychiatrist, but I've done a whole bunch of things in my career. I've treated a variety of patients in my training as well as in my residency. We're here to talk about sickle cell, but I mostly specialize in mental health and addiction. So we'll try to talk a little bit about that too.
Okay.
After we talk about sickle cell.
Yeah. And one thing I want to mention is that Cinta has a son who has sickle cell disease. So we're glad that she's here to share her story with us as well. And hopefully he'll be able to join us a little bit. There he is. Marcus is here. Yay. Hey, Marcus, how are you? Oh, he's still connecting. So we'll give him a minute or so. But Marcus has sickle cell disease. So we're going to find out their journey with sickle cell. But first, let's start with Dr. Centrell. Can you tell us what is sickle cell? What is sickle cell?
Okay, so sickle cell disease / sickle cell anemia is pretty much the same. It's the same thing. It's just different terminology for the same disease. It's a genetic disease that happens when the blood cell, the red blood cell, has a defective hemoglobin gene. So that can cause sickling when it's dehydrated or in high altitude. So that's pretty much the general thoughts of sickle cell. It's an autosomal recessive disease, meaning that both your parents have to be carriers of the disease or the defective gene to give you sickle cell disease. So that's pretty much what it is. So when you have a defective hemoglobin, it causes the hemoglobin to have an inability to attract oxygen. And when you have inability to attract oxygen, you get deoxygenated, which causes the red blood cell to sickle. And it actually has a crescent shape or a sickle shape on a blood smear. So and then that can cause problems, and we'll talk about that a little later. That can cause problems in your vessels, cause problems with your bone, cause problems with your spleen, cause you problems with your brain, such as with the spleen, it causes problems where your spleen gets destroyed, and also that causes you to be more susceptible to bacterial infections such as strep pneumoniae, Neisseria meningitis, H. influenza, which are, we all heard about those things. Strep pneumonia causes pneumonia. H. influenza, Neisseria meningitis is a brain infection that causes meningitis. Most people don't have to worry about this until later in life. Like college students have to get the Neisseria meningitis, and we also get vaccinated for influenza due to the pandemic we had in the 20s. Strep pneumonia, usually that's a treatable disease, and we can just treat that with bacteria, but it can actually be life-threatening in sickle cell disease patients. As far as the brain, you can be more susceptible to strokes. So that's an issue because it causes the sickling can clog up the vessels, as well as the kidneys. You can have hematuria, protein in your urine, and also you pretty much get kidney failure from that. As for males, it actually can cause priapism, which is elongated, like an extra long erection, which can be very painful. So those are some of the complications of sickle cell disease, and that's why we test for it early on when you're born, so that we can know if we need to treat it or not, because it actually can cause a lot of problems down the line.
So,
make
okay,
sense?
you just said that um, people are tested for it when they're born.
Mm-hmm.
But my two daughters just found out that they had sickle cell trait, and I never knew about it. They just found out, and they're 40
Well,
and
what
29. So,
yeah, so what they test for is the disease, not the trait. Trait is
okay,
more of a genetic testing, so that's different.
okay,
So when you're born, they put your blood under the blood smear and they look for sickle cells. If it's not there, then they just don't, you don't have the disease, right?
uh-huh. Okay,
But
okay.
but when you do get, why did your daughters get the testing? Or was it because of marriage?
One daughter got married, yes, and another daughter, yeah, she had some complications with some things. They did a series of blood work on her, and I
Okay.
always tell them every time you go to your doctor, ask them, to check you for sickle cell trait as
Mhm.
well as thyroid, because that's what I have.
Okay.
So I'm always telling my kids, when you go to the doctor, check for this and check for that, because that's what I have. So that way you'll know your history,
Okay.
your medical history. So I'd like to ask, well, first, welcome, Marcus. I'm glad you were able to join us.
Thank you.
How
Thank
are you
you.
doing today?
I'm doing well. How are you all?
Fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. Cinta, when did you find out that Marcus had sickle cell disease? Is it, what did you call it? Sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia? Which one did you call it?
Sickle cell anemia.
Anemia,
Disease.
Okay.
I mean, as soon as I got Marcus, they said he got sickle cell disease. I said, okay, yeah. First day. Yeah.
From birth.
So you did not know that his father had sickle cell trait or that you had sickle cell trait? Did you know these before?
Well, they told me that actually sickle cell trait is in all of our blood, all of us. Most, that it's very, very strong. But like I explained to you earlier, I have something that's called hemoglobin C disease. So the same thing when I had Dana, Darian, and even Deja, their fathers had to be tested for the sickle cell trait because they said that they could possibly end up with the sickle cell disease because I carry the hemoglobin C disease. I don't have the trait, I have hemoglobin C disease. So I was like, okay, so they had to go out, my husband, he had to go out and get tested and bring that back, to the doctor when we found out that we were carrying Deja.
So the,
Dr. Centrell, when people get engaged or they apply for a marriage license, they're not getting tested for sickle cell trait or sickle cell disease anymore?
I looked that up. It's not necessarily done anymore, but especially in African or South Asian countries, they actually can either they test you because it's such a high prevalence there. They test you as well as they encourage you not to marry each other. And actually, one church, I can't say the name, it was like Inagus or something, apparently completely bans their practitioners from getting married if they carry the trait because of the likelihood of a child being born with sickle cell disease. Although since it's autosomal recessive, both parents have to have it. So, it's like a 20% chance that your child will have sickle cell disease if both parents have it, and it's 50% chance that they'll just be a carrier like you. And, 25% chance that they won't have disease at all. So, I actually was reading about sickle cell trait. For those countries, it's actually an evolutionary benefit for them because they have a high rate of malaria. And actually, people with sickle cell trait are less likely to get malaria. So it's actually a benefit, but they don't want the sickle cell disease to become prominent. Actually, you're right. As far as the statistic goes, about 8 to 10% of African Americans actually have the trait, which is a high percentage.
Okay, so Marcus, how old were you when you found out that you had sickle cell disease or sickle cell anemia?
I probably was about maybe about 8 or 9 years old when I realized what was going on. Um, I would have these pain episodes, and I mean they would be excruciating, like where I couldn't walk, or pain would radiate throughout whichever part of my body where this like the doctor was saying. So with the sickle cells, like once the cells, because they are shaped like crescents, so once they get stuck in your joints, then the pain will radiate from that joint, up or down your body. So like, mostly like if it's sickling in my arm. So uh, the pain starts because it radiates like from, like, say, your elbow, and then it'll radiate out, down towards your hand or up towards your shoulder. So I would have different episodes, just growing up, where I would just be in pain and, couldn't do the things that, my siblings and peers were doing at the time. And so I just kind of realized that something different is going on here. So I would say about 8 or 9.
Wow.
Yeah.
And Santa, how did you have that conversation with him?
It wasn't really a conversation that I think I had to have with him, because he was taken into Grady, where they do have the sickle cell clinic, and they did explain everything very well, actually, to him, which was just explained to us. And it was just a conversation that we kind of had jointly with one another, because it was understanding that we had to have, as far as like the folic acid that he needed to take daily, his vitamins and stuff that he needed to have daily, things that he needed to eat. So it was just like, this is what you have to do. Are you on board to do it? And it's like, yes. And we all just said, yes, this is what we have to do. He was really pretty good of understanding. I mean, the only thing was probably sad when he did have a lot of pain. There was nothing that we could do when he had the pain, because every mom want to take the kid out of pain, but there was nothing we could do when the pain got started. Sometimes maybe applying some heat, maybe sometimes massaging, trying to help, but there was nothing that we could do. It was so much stronger than us. One thing we could do is just sit back and just pray, and hopefully hope that it doesn't last that long. A lot of times he ended up having to go to the hospital. He spent a lot of time in the hospital when he was younger. Yeah, a lot of time in the hospital, back and forth with it. But as he's gotten older, it's pretty much the same thing. When we face it, we just gotta just see just how long is it's gonna last.
Mhm. Okay. So, Dr. Centrell, can you explain to us what a sickle cell crisis is? What the sickle cell crisis is?
So yeah, so as I was saying before, so pretty much the crisis is when the person gets dehydrated or exerts themselves too much, where they're pretty much dehydrated in some sense. So then the cells sickle more, and then they get caught up in the blood vessels, and they get trapped at the ends of it. And so that causes pain, inflammation, and swelling. So that causes increased pain. Depending on where it ends up, like if it ends up in the chest, it's called acute chest syndrome. Usually that's caused by an infection. So the person will have hypoxia, a fever, and chest pain. And that's a medical emergency, because that can actually lead to death. If it's in the kidney, then you can get blood in your urine, protein in your urine, and then that also can causes infection in your kidney, right? So it just depends on where it happens. Sometimes it can happen in the fingers, where you get the swelling in the hands, and then if it's long term, they actually get misshapen fingertips. So that's a sickle cell crisis. It's pretty much when they have excruciating pain due to some type of occurrence, such as dehydration or infection, that causes their blood cells to sickle even more.
Okay. Wow. So Marcus, do you have any questions for the doctor?
I guess my question would be: are there any new advances and treatments for sickle cell that they've come out with in the last couple of years or so? The last thing that I came across was very outrageous, so I wasn't sure if there was something different that they're
Well,
working on currently for treatment.
what was it?
Well, the last thing that I saw, there was a young lady who was actually doing really well. So basically, if I remember correctly, they inject your body with some form of the HIV virus, right? And so, however, it doesn't turn into full blown AIDS, or there's something that stops it from turning into AIDS. And it was on Good Morning America. That's where I actually saw it at. And so yeah, and that was a risk that I wasn't willing to take. So, but yeah, it's that was the last thing that I heard, and that probably was about 5 years ago now. So, and I'm sure the video is still out there somewhere on the net. But that was the last form of treatment that they had. They had to rid her body of, I guess, whatever, her blood system, and replace it with, that one. And that was the leading cause of for the cure. But she was doing fine. She hadn't had a crisis in, I think, about a year at that time. So she was really excited. So I don't know if there's have been any changes since.
The only thing that I saw in my research was the possibility of bone marrow transplant, and also maybe uh, uh, gene transcription alterations. But I didn't see anything that's other than, the fluids, the opiates, the hydroxyurea, when you're actually like symptomatic treatment. I would love to read about that case where they injected HIV. That seems a little extreme, but
No,
apparently it stopped her from having a crisis for a year. I mean, I guess, for her, the risks and benefits of that was worth it, but
yeah,
that's
I'll if I come across, matter of fact, I'll look it up, and I'll share it, with you guys, so you could see it. But it was so extreme. It was like, well, do you take this risk, or do you just continue with the treatment plan that you've been on for years? So
yeah,
yeah, kind of drastic.
that's a big risk.
Right. Yeah. And then
Dr.
it wasn't
Sindra,
enough research to say whether or not it would, cause further complications down the line. So yeah.
Yeah, but you don't know until like the post studies,
Hmm.
Dr. Central, is there a cure for sickle cell anemia?
There's no cure.
There's no
No,
cure for it? No. Okay.
it's truly a genetic disease. It's not contagious. You can inherit it from your parents through the genetics. So there's no cure.
Okay. Now, I have sickle cell trait, and I've always been told that I couldn't donate blood because of it.
Mm.
But I was actually doing some research this week, and it said that I could donate blood. So
Yeah,
can you
so,
explain that?
so you can donate blood. Apparently, for that, it's it's actually they want you to donate blood, but they also sworn that the blood you donate may not go through their filtration process. So they rather you donate platelets, which is different, which would be a different process. But yes, if with the sickle cell trait, you can donate blood.
Now, if you donate blood, and will you be giving the sickle cell trait to another person by
No,
donating blood?
no, it's not contagious. It's not a contagious disease. It's actually a genetic disease. So you cannot pass it on to anyone by a blood transfusion. Does that make sense?
I'm kind of confused. I understand it's a genetic, but if it's in your blood, it has to do with, does it have to do with your blood?
Yes, but
Okay, but if you're doing a blood transfusion, you're giving your blood to someone,
yeah,
you're
but
not giving them that too?
you're not giving them your genes. Like your genes come from your parents.
Right.
Blood, if it was a contagious disease like HIV or Hep C or something like Hep B, those type of herpes, then you can transfer it in through the blood that way. But since it's a genetic disease, you can't transfer it through blood donations.
Okay. Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay.
Like if I sneeze on you, that's not genetics. That's a virus or bacteria that comes into your body. But the sickle cell disease, sickle cell anemia is actually a genetic component to it, where it actually affects your genetic. It's actually a gene that is transmutated in the body, but that's happens way when you're developing, not just by a virus coming into you.
Okay. 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 Now, as far as sickle cell trait, if a person has sickle cell trait, what can that do, or what will that do to that person's body? I mean, just if that person has sickle cell trait, what will it do?
So it has no health problems actually, unless you get into extreme elevation or extreme dehydration. Then you may have some minor symptoms of pain and hypoxia, but it really doesn't affect you as an individual. When it affects you is when you transfer it. If you marry someone who also carries the trait and you transfer it to your child, who has a 20% chance of getting the actual sickle cell disease / anemia. So it
So
Then
won't.
I'm sorry to interrupt. What could we do? What could two, like, if my kids both have the trait and then they fall in love with somebody else that has the trait, what could they possibly do to lower that 20% chance that you spoke of?
I mean, there's nothing you can do to lower that chance just because of the way genetics works. You know, it's kind of like, lowering the chance of them getting brown eyes or brown hair. It's not really a possibility. And that's why in some countries, the churches discourage marriage between people who carry the trait so that they don't pass on the disease. But, if two people get married, it's like a risk, but it's manageable. I actually was reading a story, not about sickle cell, but it was I can't remember her name. They played on what did they play on? Anyway, they played on a TV show together and they married each other. They're very attractive people. Anyway, she had a kid very older, and the kid got a spinal cord issue because she didn't take enough folate when she was pregnant. It's not something like that where you take folic acid and then you could prevent yourself from having diseases in your pregnancy. It's not like that. It's purely genetic. Besides being aware that you have the trait, there's really nothing much you can do.
Okay.
That's not marrying your spouse.
So Marcus, knowing that you had the sickle cell disease, what type of conversation did you have with you're married? What kind of conversation did you have with your wife to find out whether she had sickle cell trait? Because we don't have those conversations.
Right.
People don't say, okay, well, hi, my name is Jacqueline, I have sickle cell trait. They'll be like, hi, my name is Jacqueline, I'm a Leo. We don't have the conversations like, I have sickle cell trait, which we need to have, but we don't have those conversations. So knowing that you have the sickle cell disease, Marcus, what type of conversation did you have with your now wife?
Well, honestly, at the time, I mean, in my youth, I mean, that wasn't a conversation that I had. I mean, I think I was more so, I wouldn't say ashamed or embarrassed, but just had a stigma about, because I don't have the trait, I have the disease. And so like, it was more so of, what is she gonna think? How is she gonna feel? Is she still gonna like me afterwards? So, you kind of I didn't have that conversation at all, but I will say, one of the things I share with my children is that you have the conversation, because they both are carriers of the trait. And so I encourage them to, as they get older, because they're only 11 and 9. So, just telling them that they do have a trait, and as they, begin to like, girls, that they're gonna have a conversation because, dad has to go to the hospital sometimes. And so, that's why. So, as you guys get older, you're gonna have a conversation with the people that you're interested in to see if they have sickle cell trait, so. But that's a conversation that my wife and I did not have. And, just thankful that, the boys only ended up with the trait. So that was, by the grace of God, I would say.
So being that you had the sickle cell anemia, you didn't tell your wife that you had sickle cell anemia when you were dating?
I did. I did tell her at a certain point. We did have a talk about it. She was not a carrier of the trait. Um, no, so she wasn't a carrier of the trait, and so we were lucky, or at that point, we were, felt kind of like out of the woods, if you will, like, great opportunity to have a family.
Mm, okay. Okay. Well, Dr. Centrell, what are some activities should a person with sickle cell trait or sickle cell anemia avoid? What are some activities they should avoid?
So they should avoid things that, well, I actually don't know how to answer this question because the thing is, what do you say don't avoid? Like, don't go to Colorado, don't go on vacation, don't go flying on a plane because of high altitude, don't exercise because of the possibility of being dehydrated, so I think the awareness of you having the disease should give you a lifestyle that is healthy and well-rounded. So like you make sure that you maintain your fluid hydration. You make sure that if you're going for long walks or you're going on an airplane, that you do have water and the supplies that will help you. Possibly your your pain management regimen. Make sure that you're vaccinated, things like that. Make sure that you're staying in touch with your primary care doctor so that you are on top of the disease. Make sure that the yearly flu vaccine you're getting, things like that, are like more of the things that we all should be doing. But since you have the sickle cell disease, or any other chronic illness, that you should be more prone to taking care of yourself properly. Does that make sense? Because how do you tell somebody don't don't travel because you're gonna go to high heights? Don't go to, if you live in Colorado. Well, maybe you should move if you live in Colorado, but like some people with COPD or asthma or extreme allergies move to Colorado because they get more oxygenated there. But
Okay.
people make lifestyle changes based on their illnesses in general. Don't live in Arizona, but some people may have family in Arizona.
Right.
Trust me, the dehydration level. I traveled to Arizona once. I wasn't even sweating. That's how dehydrated I was. It was like no sweat.
No sweat.
So
So
one thing I had always had a question about folic acid, because they pushed it so much and said every single day. Because Marcus, don't you take it every day still?
Yes.
What does this really do?
It just makes anemia, right? Anemia pretty much is destruction of the red blood cells. So when you're anemic in other ways, like folic acid would help you make sure that you're not destroying your red blood cells, or it would help your red blood cells to be healthier. So that's pretty much like you can be anemic from that, like low folic, low different. It helps produce red blood cells, and that's the goal. That's the work. And that's why women should take it when they're pregnant. We all should take it. It's in my multivitamin. Yeah.
And they also said it helps the cells not to stick.
Right.
So
it makes the red blood cells healthier.
Mm-hmm.
is that something
less likely to be destroyed? Huh?
Is it something you have to take every day, the folic acid, or do you take it, for maybe
take it every day
at a time, or you can't overtake it if you take it every single day. You can you have to take it maybe 2 weeks at a time and then stop for a while, or
no, you take it every day.
Every day. Well, okay.
My multivitamin has folic acid, and most multivitamins have folic acid, and that's why he probably just has a higher dose than an average person.
Okay. So Marcus, what were some of the things that you avoided, being that you had sickle cell anemia? What were some of the things you avoided doing that you had sickle cell anemia?
Well, sports. I wasn't able to. I mean, I would play sports, but not like in high level or a serious game, but just playing around, baseball, running, things like that as a kid, definitely would do those things, but just not in the sense where you were pushed like an athlete. Um, Swimming, even with, you know, showering, like, you can't just get out of the shower, and go about your day, so what I do, I kind of hang the towel over the shower, and then I dry myself before I get out of the shower, so my body temperature, you know don't get drastic, because that'll send me into a crisis, and it's different for a lot of people, but that was one of the things, not getting too dehydrated, trying to rest as much as I can, because if I'm up too much or, not resting well, that'll cause my body to act crazy, stress, so these are the things that I try to avoid and try to be cognizant of because, my body definitely reacts to, the over, stimulated part of those things, too hot, too cold, you know, too much stress, too much exertion, those things will definitely send me into a crisis. So, but as I've gotten older, I've been able to try to manage it a lot better, So just coming up with different things that, you know, allow me to know that these are the things that I wouldn't necessarily say I can't do, but I have to do differently.
Yeah, it's not a can't do it. It's how do I do it differently, and how do I make sure I am protected? Like I'm dehydrated, I'm not stressed, I'm not changing temperatures too quickly, or even altitudes.
Hmm.
Well,
Yeah.
Dr. Central, can you explain about the water? Like he was saying, like when he get out the shower, he had to dry in the shower, so that something with the body temperature. Can you explain what that?
The only thing I could think of is that the switch. When you have hot water coming on, it vasodilates everything. Like you flow better. Then if he comes out the heat and goes into the cold quickly, it
Right.
constricts. So
Exactly.
he already has tendency for his red blood cells, which are defective, to clog up his vessels. So if they constrict, he's just clamping down on the red blood cells, which should throw him into a crisis. So that's what I imagined when he said that. You understand? Like when you're in the hot water, or even with heating pads, it allows your blood to flow more. It allows your circulations to be better. But then you go into the cold, your
Right.
blood vessels constrict, which tightens up so that you can retain your heat.
Okay, that makes sense. That makes sense. Okay. Now, Asenta, I have a question for you. Now, being that Marcus is your oldest and he had the sickle cell disease and all, did you have the conversations with your other children's father before you, once you got into a relationship as far as the sickle cell disease and sickle cell trait, you having you said hemoglobin
Hemoglobin C.
C,
Yeah.
hemoglobin C? Yeah. You're on mute.
Oh, sorry. So you're saying, did I have the conversation
Yeah, did you have
with,
a conversation with them about you having hemoglobin C and to find out if they had the sickle cell trait? Did you have that conversation with them?
no. I mean, the most we ever talked about it was if something was going on with Marcus, like what's going on. And then they got understanding of what, sickle cell was. Now, I did explain to them about, what it was, of course, and everything like that. And then, of course, about them. And like we talked earlier about who you're going to be dealing with, you need to watch and make sure that they may or may not have this trait. And if you want to throw it up there and go that route, then you do. Not trying to say don't love that person, don't be with that person because this is a possibility. You don't want to say that to anybody, but you got to understand this is your chance that if you want to take it, then you take it. So they got an understanding of what it was because they saw Marcus. They seen him. They seen him in pain. They seen him cry. They seen him go to the doctor. You know, they went to the hospital sometimes, so they understood it at that, you know, as much as a little kid can understand, because you understand there's 10 years between Marcus and, you know, Dana and Darian, and 14 years between him and Deja. So.
And one of the things I didn't hear anyone talk about is, you know, my mom, she has the hemoglobin C, and the boys have hemoglobin C as well. There are two different types of sickle cell anemia. You have the SC and the SS, and you know, SS being the more severe form of sickle cell, and those are typically like your more smaller patients with the jaundiced eyes, and a lot of those issues, um, you know, where, you know, well, you can definitely have those same issues with the sickle cell SC, which is what I have. I have SC. Um, and so uh, the reason why I thought about that was because, you know, as my mom was talking, like, you know, that's a real conversation. I mean, and not that you want either version, I would think, but, you know, definitely if you are, you know, planning to have kids and someone may have, you know, the father may have the S, you know, trait, or, you know, both parents have to pass on a trait in order for the child to actually acquire the disease. And so, like, so my father would have had to have the S trait because my mom has the C trait in order for me to have gotten the SC trait, if that makes sense. So, I mean, just something more to probably even talk about, or for, you know, couples to even think about as they begin the dating process and having, you know, that conversation about sickle cell anemia and dating, you know.
That is just a conversation that people do not have nowadays.
Right.
I mean, honestly, yeah, people don't have many conversations that are important. So it's like, you know, we want to talk about what is it?
Astrology.
Astrology, you know, am I compatible with Leo? I'm not compatible with you. Oh, but you know, do your parents, I mean, but you know, it's really hard conversations. Like, you know, even as a doctor, when I'm asking patients about their medical history, or, you know, their family medical history, they're very shy about it. Then they're like, I don't know. And then if they're like, if it's a kid, then their mama come and they're like, oh yeah, this is what's going on in the family. And then they're like, oh, well, I knew that. It's like, well, I asked you first, you know?
Right.
So, you know, and then even when it's older people, you know, like people who deal with chronic illness, people who deal with infectious disease, the people who deal with chronic things like, you know, sickle cell, or if they had cancer or something like that, you know, there is a component of shame and embarrassment, you know, that they have. So it's just important, you know, if especially if you get serious about someone, you know, have less conversation about if I'm a Leo and a Virgo, or a Leo, you know, or you know, and more of a serious conversation. You know, like, these are the issues that I've experienced in my life. This is my financial situation. This is my credit score. You know, you know, where I see myself in 5 years. You know, not that I like new pair of Jordans, or how about those Yeezys?
Right.
I know when I talked to my son and his new girlfriend, they was having a baby, I said, did you guys have a conversation about, and I said it with sickle cell, with hemoglobin and different, because my son Darian knows. And his girlfriend was like, no. And I said, well, why? And I told him, I said, well, I'm upset at you, Darian, because this is a conversation you should have been having with her. Because it wasn't like it was a oops, you know, they dated for almost a year. So you guys had a year of going back and forth with things. And yes, you should have had this kind of conversation with one another. I'm not trying to say, I thank God that I didn't have it bad. I had it really bad when I was younger, and they discovered it when I was young. I think I was probably in the 3rd or 4th grade when they start telling me about it and explaining to it, you know, me about it. So I got to grow up with it and research with it, and then I thank God that I was able to join the military, because a lot of people not even allowed to join the military. I was shocked they let me in. So that's it. But I told him it could not be as easy, and it could flip down to his child. He has a child now. It could flip down to your child. So this is a conversation you really should have had with her. When you guys sit back and you're realizing that you are going to be intimate and you're not going to do safe stuff, when you want to talk about other stuff that you can get unsafe sex, you need to go there. If a baby comes, these are the possibilities. Period.
So, so Cinta is saying hemoglobin C, that you couldn't go into the military with that. Okay, is hemoglobin C the same as sickle cell trait, or similar to sickle cell trait, or what's the difference between those two?
Well, see, I have the hemoglobin C. The sickle cell is hemoglobin, it's hemoglobin SC or SS, something like that. Isn't that correct, Marcus? But I can pass if I get with somebody who has the sickle cell trait, then I will have a child end up with sickle cell disease. So I can carry, I don't have hemoglobin like you have, Jacqueline, or you have the sickle cell trait.
Right.
I don't have the sickle cell trait. I have the hemoglobin C disease, which means it's up from the actual trait, which means that's what makes me end up being able to have a child ending up with the sickle cell disease if I get with somebody who ends up having a sickle cell trait, if that makes sense to you. So I heard you explain a little bit earlier, Marcus. Explain the C and the S to it.
Well, just based on my years of just going through it, if I remember correctly, I think it's the right way, and Dr. Centrell definitely can chime in and correct me if I'm wrong, but so both parents would have to pass on a gene. And I was under the impression that hemoglobin C was a carrying trait, but it could be.
I was under that impression too.
Yeah. But
it just may be. I made someone, but I've never was turned and told you have the hemoglobin trait. So you have sickles, you have the hemoglobin C disease. And I was like, so what is, that? And when they printed out everything, gave me a big old stack of stuff and started telling me the, stuff I needed to take. And just like you were speaking of, doctor, I need to stay hydrated and I need to do this vitamins and blah, blah, blah. I said, okay. And I just went on about my way.
Yeah, there are definitely side effects with the traits. You don't necessarily get the pain side effects and the sickling, the sickling part, just based on what I've learned just throughout the years. But you definitely have the responsibility of being a carrier, and so, like I said, there's two types of sickle cell. There's the SS and the SC, and just depending on, of course, if you have hemoglobin C, then if the person you're dating doesn't have the trait, any sickle cell trait, then your child probably wouldn't get. Where there's always a percentage that the child can get the trait because one of the parents is a carrier. But if the father has the disease or has the sickle cell trait, then they could definitely pass on either the S part of the disease, and you would have the C, which would create the SC part of it. And so, like, another parent could have the hemoglobin S part, because obviously a child can get sickle cell disease SS, which is the more severe part. So some kind of way, I would assume in my mind that those genes are passed on. Is that right, Dr. Centrell? Like, what can you be a hemoglobin S?
But a hemoglobin S and what?
So like she has hemoglobin C. Is there a hemoglobin S trait as well?
There is. Yeah.
Okay.
So I think both are carriers. It's just a different form of a carrier. I didn't really want to dive into the S and A, C, because that just gets confusing. But so since we're there, so pretty much if a person with C has the hemoglobin C, which is a different hemoglobin than the normal hemoglobin that we have, which is the alpha and the beta. So if you have that and you have a mutation of hemoglobin B, which would be sickle, see, it just gets confusing. So anyways,
Right.
so pretty much it's a defective hemoglobin, and you can get genetic testing to figure out what causes a defect. Then there's a name for it: hemoglobin S, hemoglobin C, etc. But if both people have that, and they mate and they have a child together, then that gives the child a risk of having the disease. Now the risk is varied depending on um, it's like I said before, 25% of those people who are carriers will have a child with sickle cell disease, whether it's SS, SC. SS is worse. You will get the symptoms a lot earlier than the person with SC. Okay. So, where was I? So then you have 25% likelihood that the child won't be affected at all. Then 50% your child will be carrier, right? So that's just, it just gets confusing when you start adding all the S's, and we probably need a chalkboard to really do it properly to follow the flow. But
Right.
yeah. Huh?
I never heard about the hemoglobin C. I've always heard about the sickle cell trait and sickle cell anemia and sickle cell disease. But the
So the hemoglobin has a structure, which will is what's the S and C name is. That's what it's for, to name the structure that hemoglobin has. So it just can get confusing if we try to talk more about it, more than what we already said. SS severe, SC not as severe. They're both sickle cell disease, but one you will see it later on in life, like later on, like 8 years old to teenage year, versus early on when like the kid is younger. And that person also would probably have more severe attacks or more severe crisis, like you'll get the jaundice skin, the yellowing of the eyes, the gallbladder issues, and then the chest pain faster, things like that.
So the hemoglobin C is the same, almost the same as the sickle cell disease.
It's similar to being it's similar to the carrier trait.
Oh, okay, okay. Because I was going to ask Cinta if you had any symptoms or pains or anything like that, being that you had sickle hemoglobin C.
Well, in all honesty, there was some reason why I ended up in a doctor. I don't remember what it was. I do remember that my mom had to take me to the doctor. I do remember sitting on the bed and the doctor coming in and explaining to my mom. I think I had some kind of pain at school or something like that. I told you, I was young. I remember being in elementary school, and I remember him coming and sitting down and explaining to my parents what it was, and him asking my mother if she had sickle cell, and my mom said no. And then he was like, well, normally that's when your child ends up with this. And I remember her saying, so she has like the sickle cell trait. And he said, no, she has hemoglobin C disease. She has the disease, not the trait. And I'm saying, I do remember I was in elementary school. And I remember all that going on and them giving me a big stack of the papers to read about it. And I said, okay. And I went on from there, and everywhere that I went on. And when I joined the military, I remember explaining it to them. I still had the stack of paper that they gave me from when I was younger, showing it to them. Now, what's amazing is my mom had 4 kids. I'm the only one that ended up with anything.
25% chance.
Ain't none of this. I can't win the lottery. Not like that.
You might win the lottery. I mean, you might win a lottery. You have,
let me get that 25%. But yes, yeah, and that's the exact point right there. My mom had 4 kids, and I was the only one that got anything. Because my sister has had children, and of course, when she went in, they tested her. She was good. She didn't have to do nothing. And all my sisters and brothers have all have children, and there was no point where the doctor had to come and say, well, you're testing for this and so on and so forth. Yeah, nothing. I was the only person.
Well, my mom and dad had 8, and 4 of us, I believe 4 of us have sickle cell trait. And I have 4, and that I know of, 2 have the trait. I don't know whether my sons have it or not.
Yeah, SACC. We could keep going. B.
Yep.
So Dr. Central,
There's an F. Exactly. There's an F. Well, that's only in fetus, but yeah, there's an F.
well, let's talk about the race that has it the most. Why is it that African Americans have it more so than any other race? Or do we have it more so than any other race?
Well, yeah, we do, but I think that's just based on where we're carriers from Africa. You know, like I said, that's the sickle cell disease, sickle cell traits is highly prevalent in African and South Asian areas. And like I said, from my research, it says that actually it's an advantage for those people because of the malaria. So it actually may just be an evolutionary advantage, an evolutionary thing that occurred that just, you know, now we don't necessarily need that no more because we have treatment for malaria. Well, not there. People still are dying of malaria over there. But also, we're not as exposed in America to malaria as, you know, other countries. So yes, but doesn't mean that white people don't have it. They just have it. There is less prevalent.
Okay. Okay. So Marcus, how are you doing now with everything?
Again, one of the things that I've definitely had to do as I've gotten older is prioritize, I guess, if that makes sense. Like, definitely be more cognizant of what I'm doing. And so, like, if, the family is going out to the pool, I may have to warm up to getting in the pool, and then just like getting in, I have to take my time getting out. Like, just things that people kind of take for granted where you can go jump into a nice, cool, swimming pool. I couldn't do the same thing. And so just as I've gotten older, I think, I understand that I definitely, well, I have less crisis where I would have to be hospitalized. I've learned to endure a lot longer, uh, medicate myself at home, of course. Um, Something that I didn't want to do initially, but you just learn, especially when there's responsibility. I was able to finish, high school, graduate from college. I have a family. I take my kids to school every day. Uh, I work, every day. So it's like, I have learned to manage now because I think about, in my teens and being a kid where, I mean, when I started hurting, like I wasn't the kind of person that would like to endure, like I wanted to go to the doctor and get some relief. I mean, it really is excruciating, but as I've gotten older, I've just kind of learned to manage and endure and, drink plenty of water, stay hydrated, take my medications and not overexert myself. Some things I have to say no to, and that's okay. Uh, as a kid, you don't really want to say no to, running and playing outside with your friends, from the time, the sun goes up to the sun goes down, but, as an adult with responsibilities, I have learned to say no and take my time and just not overdo it. That's the biggest thing I feel like I've learned, and it helps me now with how I'm doing. And uh i haven't I was gonna say I haven't had a crisis in 2 years, but I haven't gone to the hospital in 2 years. But I still have a crisis, but again, like I said, I just kind of manage it at home as much as I can. But yeah, for the last couple of years, I've been doing pretty good.
That's great. That's great. Now, earlier you were talking about being embarrassed and being ashamed. How are you dealing with that now?
This is my first public conversation that I've ever had about having sickle cell anemia. And I've always wanted to share and be involved. Sometimes or you wait for opportunities, and I think that's kind of what happened in this situation. And I appreciate it because it's given me a different level of freedom. I feel like I feel a lot more free to be able to speak. Now, I do share in private, or just I've never done it in a public forum. Um, but if I run into kids or people that I know, or I don't mind sharing or talking about it. But um, I think a lot more of these types of conversations need to be had, and so I appreciate this opportunity. So
Definitely
I think I'm
appreciate.
doing okay. I think I'm okay with sharing.
That's great. But see, what's so funny about this is I've known Senta for over 20 years, and I did not know that Marcus had sickle cell disease. I did not
Uh,
know. So,
yeah,
so she didn't share that.
yeah. So it's one of those things that you just kind of go with the flow. I think, like and then, like for most people, I have a cousin who just transitioned maybe about 3 weeks ago now, and she had SS. And so, she was always in the hospital, always had something going on, just trying to deal with this thing called sickle cell anemia. And so that hasn't been my life. And so I'm very grateful and appreciative for that. But I was saying that to say, like, sometimes you have situations where people are always battling it. And then you have situations like mine where I would only have to, go to the hospital maybe 3 times a year. And everything else is just me just trying to manage it and not overdoing it. So it may not have been too many opportunities where it has come up. So you know, but I definitely appreciate the conversation right now.
And we definitely appreciate it as well. And anytime you want to come on and you want to have that conversation just to educate people about it, we can
Mhm.
definitely do that. Because, like I said, a lot of people don't know about sickle cell trait, sickle cell disease. The fact that if you have sickle cell trait and you plan on getting married, you need to talk to your future spouse about whether they have it or not, for your children's sake. So, yeah, this is a conversation that's definitely needed. I really appreciate you being here. So, Dr. Central, do you have any final thoughts?
I guess my final thought was like, what do you, Marcus, right?
Mm,
Marcus? Okay,
yes.
yes. What does you think is the primary thing you do daily that keeps you out of the hospital? Because I think a lot of people struggle with day to day managing chronic illnesses. So you have sickle cell disease. What is the primary thing that you do daily that you think helps you stay out of the hospital?
Honestly, I think I stay hydrated. Like, I drink water from the time I hit the floor until the time I go to sleep. I drink a lot of water. And the other thing I would say is taking my medication at home. Like, maybe about, I think I've been taking my medication at home for about 8 to 10 years now. So before, I did not want to take medication. Like, I thought it had a stigma. you know well, if I take this medicine, I'm gonna always need it.
Mhm.
But with again, trying to finish my education and having a family, it was like, I can't run to the hospital every time I get sick. I have to learn how to push myself a little harder, and take my medication at home. And so, and I know I keep saying that, but it was really the biggest, you know thing for me. It made me realize that I can actually, stay in class. I may have to rest for the first 30 minutes and, allow my medication to start working, make sure I'm hydrated, but I can stay in my class and finish my class and not have to go home and go to sleep and pray that the pain go away. I can take something at home and it will start to subside, other than going to the hospital and then I have to stay for um, you know, 3 to 5 days
5 days.
before I find any relief. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
So that was the biggest thing for me is really being hydrated, prayer, having some type of spiritual or meditation prayer life, and also taking my medication. That has helped me tremendously to be able to run a business, have a family. Again, I take my kids to school every day. I pick them up every day. uh, I'm home. Just think, I feel like I can live somewhat of a normal life. So I would say those are the biggest things for me.
Well, thank you so very much for sharing that with us. And thank you, Dr. Centrell, for being here with us and explaining to us about sickle cell disease, sickle cell trait, and hemoglobin C. And a special thank you to Marcus and Cinta for sharing your story with our viewers.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
And thank you all for watching us on Facebook Live. And remember that everything you heard and everything we said was our point of view. We will see you next time. Good night.